All right. Welcome. Thank you for attending our presentation. I am one of two people presenting today. We're going to kind of tag team it somewhat here. My name is Loretta Maase, and I'm from Austin, Texas. I am with Turning Points for Families Texas program. And I'm introducing Sandra Aguilar, who is also from Austin, and we'll just jump right in if I can figure out how to do this. That's us, Sandra Aguilar and Loretta. Okay, I'm going to introduce to you Sandra Aguilar, who's going to talk about double binds, no-win double binds in the litigation process.
As Loretta said, I'm Sandra, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit first about kind of how I came into the work, just so you have a little bit of background about me and kind of how this started for me and PA and recognizing it. So in 2004, 2003 and 4, I started working for Travis County as a guardian ad litem in their domestic relations office. And I was specifically assigned to the protective order docket. So there was a specific judge and heard the protective orders, and then if the judge had a concern about the children in part of those protective orders, then a guardian ad litem would get assigned. And I was the lucky one who had that whole docket because I was a Spanish speaker and I could also speak English. So that ended up being me. And so what happened for me in doing this work is that a judge would assign me. I'd interview mom, I'd interview dad, I'd interview the kids, and then I'd also get regular cases that were suit affecting the parent-child relationships, the SAPSers, or regular divorce. And in those cases, I would do the work. I'd interview mom, interview dad, interview all the collaterals and the children. And what I found was that the kids that were in the protective order docket, and those kids, they wanted to see their parent who had allegedly physically assaulted them or assaulted the mom. And those kids wanted to see their parent. They just would say, I just want the violence to stop, but they wanted to see those parents. Regular cases, that was a SAPSer or a divorce, did the interview, and they didn't want to see a parent, and the reasons they were giving me were like, at that point in time, I didn't know the idea of frivolous reasons, but I was like, this is ridiculous. This does not make sense. These kids should maybe have more reasons on why they don't want to see the parent in comparison to these children. And so I would go to my supervisor and I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to make recommendations that these kids see the parent and they have a relationship. I'm going to put some protective measures in place. And these kids are willing and ready to go. They're like excited and happy. I want to see my mom. I want to see my dad or a grandparent. These kids were like, I'm not going. You can't make me. I'm not going to let you supervise a visit. You can't do it. And I'd be like, yes, I am. You're going to be there if I have to, And so I would observe those visits. And at that point in time, I did not know anything about parental alienation. I was like, what is this? This is just too weird. It was just so weird for me. And so that's how I slowly stumbled into doing this work and just built from there and then started doing my own things with that. But currently what I do, so I did child custody work for the last 15 years. Right now I work at a law firm, which is kind of different. So I work as a full-time consultant in a law firm, and what I do is I take a case and I do the interview from the get-go. We might have just a regular divorce and parents can figure it out. We may have a case that we have the target parent. We may have the favored parent. And I screen them, and I look at every case internally as if I was like the custody evaluator. I look at all of mom's pieces, all of dad's pieces. I have releases to talk to the professionals. If there's an evaluator on, I talk to that person. And so I work internally, and I love it. Absolutely love what I'm doing. And 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 the part of why I did this is because I was finding that as a child custody evaluator, making the recommendations, I ended up on the hot seat, which I didn't mind, but I wasn't really able to make the impact that I wanted to for those children. And so in this way, in working at a law firm, I'm able to make those impacts even when we have the target parent, even when we have the favored parent, to sometimes redirect them, educate them, and show them how that is negatively impacting their child. And when they say to us, well, our child doesn't want to go, we say to them, you have a court order that says you better get that child there. And I don't know how you're going to do it, but you get that 15-year-old to that visit. You have to do that. As the law firm, we're not going to justify that you don't get them there. You can't tell us they don't want to get there. You have to get the child there. And that is usually the hardest step to get them to get there. Yes, ma'am.
So, at what point are you, when you say you review the other parents' records or information, how do you obtain that? At what point is that in the process?
So in discovery, usually it happens during the discovery period. Records start get subpoenaed, in discovery process, anything that is given to one side has to be given to the other side. And so in that discovery process, yeah.
So it's not in terms of intake, it's later in the case?
Correct. It's during the discovery process. Did you have a question? Yes.
Real quick, I'm assuming Texas is a one-party consent for
Audio recording? Yes, it is. Audio and video recording? Yes.
If you're the consultant for one party, is there a conflict of interest of the other party not wanting to utilize you because
They don't,
you could be biased?
so they don't utilize me. I just get to see their records. I work for, for example, if I work for his law firm, with the discovery process and everything that's coming in, I look at everything. And the position that I take in the law firm is I'm not always supporting what the attorney's doing. And I tell them, look, if I was the guardian on this case, here are the problems with our client. And if our client can't get on board, we're not helping these children. Here's what I see on the other side, and here's what I see with this client. And if I was the guardian, I would be saying, Dad, you need to do A, B, C, D, and E in order for absolute best case scenario for kids. And so that's how I attain all the information, and I'm able to give that information to the attorney that I'm working with. And sometimes when we go to mediation, because in the area that we work in, I have a long history of doing child custody evaluations. If we're in a mediation, I usually know the mediator and the other attorney. And so they know that I'm looking at it from a kid perspective. And so often the mediator will say, well, Sandra, what do you think? And so I'll give them a little bit of input on what I think. Yes, ma'am.
So if the alienators still say, well, she doesn't want to get in the car, then talkative parent can say, well, I'm not confident intent. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
First rejection or refuse to take the children to see therapy?
Correct.
First time?
Yes, they can.
Immediately that day?
Yes.
And what consequences that he will be facing
The
if the alienator did not bring the child to see a therapist?
Well, in our area, what would happen first, the judge would give them a scolding and say, you need to get them there, here's what we're looking at, here's what you're facing, here, all of those things.
The judge says, okay, your consequences will be losing parenting time if you keep doing this.
Correct. Or incarceration. Mm-hmm.
But would that be like over 2, 3, 4 times?
It just depends. Some judges let it go a little bit longer. Some judges are like, you're bringing it to me, round 1. Let's see what she does at round 3 or 4. Okay. So it just depends. Every judge, so where we live, obviously there's different counties. And so every county judge handles it a little bit different. And you kind of know already when you're going in front of one of those judges like, we better have more before we try to set this hearing. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that I'm able to do in the law firm, and I have a couple of slides and I'm willing to share them, but I want to just kind of talk with y'all so y'all kind of get a sense of what I do. But one of the other things that I do in the law firm, if we have the target parent, I help prepare the entire case for the attorney to present PA in the courtroom with or without an expert. Usually we try to get an expert, we try to get, I might send, if I think we have a PA case, there's certain therapists in the community that are great in doing the work, and I will give them a call and I'll say, I have a case, I'd like for you to work on it. I don't give them any information ahead of time. I don't bias them. I say to them, what's your availability? Do you have time to do reunification for 2 kids? Blah, blah, blah. And so if they have the availability, then they take the case on. But I start to prep the case from the very beginning on, from when we first interview. I start to figure out, do we have a target parent? Do we have a favored parent? Or is it just a regular divorce? And that's not an issue. Or is it a drug and alcohol issue? Or is it a drug and alcohol issue with PA? Or is it, so we start to organize that whole thing. And I also have the privilege that I have taken cases as a consultant outside of the state of Texas and help attorneys prepare their case to present before a judge. And so because I take the case from a perspective as a mental health provider, I think of things that attorneys don't think about to ask the clinician or the expert or the child custody evaluator, or what to look for when they're reading particular notes from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And so I set that up for the attorney in the best way possible so that it best benefits our client, especially when we have the target parent. Yes, ma'am.
You're working for the attorney that is working for one client.
Correct.
Either the mother or the father or one
Yes.
of the parents. And if your findings are that the parent that your attorney is working for is an alienating parent, what happens then? This is very, very interesting what you're saying. I come from Holland, and we have experts and a gal, what you have.
Yes.
In a way, you are that in a pre-stadium. Do I understand that right?
Sort of, yes. So I'm going to take your question. If I start interviewing and collecting information and I realize that we have the favored parent, I go to the attorney and I say to the attorney, we have the alienator. I'm going to try to educate the alienator on what their behavior is causing and bringing to this child. And if they don't stop the behavior, here are the risks in a courtroom. Not only just what are the risks in a courtroom, but here are the mental health risks to your child.
So you're not just diagnosing, you're also aiding.
I don't diagnose them because, correct, yes. Yes, I'm evaluating and assessing what's happening, and I'm looking at it and taking it from that perspective. So if we have the favored parent, I go to the attorney and I say, here are the concerns, and if we can't rehabilitate this person and they're not willing to do the work, here are the risks.
But what is the risk that this alienating parent will look for another attorney?
They will.
They will.
They will. But a lot of times, the attorney that I work for at that point will say, look, I'm not willing to risk your child, number one, the mental health issues that happen to this child or can happen, and I'm not going to take you to a hearing knowing potentially what could happen. And so a lot of times they'll withdraw.
Irreconcilable differences.
So a lot of times they'll withdraw. But I'm glad you asked that question. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So, with all this rhetoric about reunification and the 90-day no contact solution, instead of 90-day no contact, how about therapeutic supervised visitation for the alienator? Now we're not alienating them, they're getting their visitation, but it's supervised by a therapist. Does that bypass our issue?
Are you asking me a question or are you making a comment?
I'm questioning and asking what is the audience, all of us think, can we bypass this issue that they were being opposed about the 90-day no contact? Because they're saying, well, now the alienator's being alienated? Therapeutic supervised visitation?
So my best response to that being, having done this work as long as I have, I would say if it was, depending if it was at a mild or a moderate level, maybe. But at a severe level, I don't think that would,
Yeah,
Yeah.
if it was severe, the alienator's not gonna come.
right, but
And
so,
it's custodial interference, which is a felony.
right. So to answer your, that's the best way I would answer your question.
Okay. Because
But-
I'm thinking that's a change of the dynamic to get the reunification in.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the other things, and then I'm going to segue into Loretta, is that one of the things that I do also in my role at the law firm is that I educate the parent on how to interact with the other parent, how to interact with the children. If they're going to reunification therapy, how to best interact with the reunification therapist, especially if we have the target parent, because they're going to present. We all know the 4A's and the 4C's and all that kind of stuff. So I talk to them about, look, when you get a little bit anxious, this is how that can be perceived. So let's work on how we're going to do that. How do you best present your concern about your child and how much you love your child to the professional? And so we talk a little bit about that. I don't desensitize them. I don't do therapy with them, but I walk them through that process because it's someplace they've never been. And so walking them through that process and how to do that and how to get through the no-win double binds that Loretta's going to go into, because a lot of times, they'll be put in the situation of, well, we can't meet on Tuesday because they have baseball. Are you willing to do it on Thursday? And I'm like, no, you go on Tuesday. All that kind of stuff that comes in and happens for these parents. And so just educating them on how to best participate. Yes, sir.
I mean, it sounds like a great role. How often does this happen? Are you unique, or do other law firms do this?
So I am one of 2 people in the state of Texas that are in a law firm.
But you find yourself, I mean, you're on the side, potentially, legally, potentially, of the alienator, and normally they'll fight against incoming comments, but if your lawyer's saying you need to talk to this person, give them the opportunity to learn something they would have never otherwise seen, learned, what have you. I mean, it sounds just like a great role.
It is very different, I try to, on some cases, I try to look at alienation. If we have the alienator, I try to look at it like somebody who comes in with an addiction issue and they don't really realize how far their addiction has gone. And so being in this role, I have to sometimes wiggle a little bit to gain trust with the alienator to then say, look, you're about to lose your kids if you don't get your shit together. So are you going to get it together or you're not? Because we kind of need to know that.
It's just surprising that there's 2 in Texas.
Yes.
Do you see it getting more?
I don't know. A lot of attorneys, when they know, they'll be, the idea is attracting, but I don't know that it'll catch on. But I love it. I absolutely love what I'm doing, where I'm at, and just working that process.
There's also the price point, so that if a firm is having a consultant, those fees are getting passed at the time. So
Well, that's what
It-
you need.
it
You need a
is-
study to
it
see
is,
what
but-
their effect is.
it's not going to be for low income.
Yeah.
Well, and so that's kind of a double thing, is because I'm less expensive than the attorney, and because of my therapeutic background, I'm going to work better with the client than necessarily the attorney is going to, because I'm going to have different language, I'm going to be able to do some validation, I'm going to be able to do some redirecting, and the attorney doesn't have that skill, and that's not what they do. So in a sense, the price point is less because they're not.
The attorney too.
They are, but there's less contact with the attorney when they're coming to me. Yeah, so that's kind of what the trend that's happened is they're looking for me a lot of times than now just wanting the attorney, is because of some of that redirecting that's happening. Yes? Yes, we need to go.
I just think that where I work, it's like attorneys are afraid of getting grievances filed against them from the alien parent, so they will litigate. These are, attorneys that know about cross-examination, and it feels like they sell their soul to just continue to try to litigate. I'm just wondering, how do you fire clients or
You withdraw.
withdraw, and do you guys have grievances filed sometimes?
Grievances get filed, but those people are going to get.
Right.
What you notice is that they're the type of client, if a client's going to file a grievance, almost always they're just going to do it anyway. It's kind of like as a therapist, when you have that client that you're like, I see the writing on the wall. They're gonna file no matter what on my license. So I just have to be prepared and put the things in place, the safety measures in place to protect my license. Same thing that an attorney does at the law firm.
We have those
Yeah.
trends as well.
Yeah.
That same parent that is potentially withdrawing or forcing you to withdraw is usually the same situation where if they get information from a pediatrician that they disagree with, they
Correct. It's behavior. Yep.
It's the Google reviews that probably are most.
You have another question back there
Oh.
in the very back.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I want to be attorney in senior services. Obviously, you would be speaking with my attorney. His attorney, my husband's the ex-husband, his attorney is more the issue. She's just as willing to be disingenuous with the court and suggest strategies to my husband on how to extend the alienation. She has absolutely no problem lying to the judge.
A negative
How would you
advocate.
handle a situation like that?
Well, we would, so I would not necessarily have any contact with the opposing party's attorney. I would be working everything internally with our attorney and the attorney that I work for, and working the case up and then having that information. But you're describing a negative advocate, and they're out there,
Right,
you know,
how do you stop a force like that?
in the courtroom. The quicker you get it to the court, and that's what happens a lot of times, is a lot of these cases take too long to get in front of a judge. The quicker you get them in front of a judge, the better. That's always more helpful. If you want to talk a little bit later, I'd be happy to chat. Yes, sir.
Two quick questions for you. One, how do you communicate your work product to your supervising attorney? Like, what does that look like? You're doing an outline or something? Two, what, if any, best practices have you developed to shield attorney work product privilege, where you're acting with clients and others perhaps on the attorney's behalf?
Right, so everything at this point in time, my understanding is it's attorney client product, work product, so it's protected. How I build it up is I create timelines. I refer to different items that I've pulled. I write all the questions for the attorney for here's this witness, here's what this person is seeing, here's this professional, here's the conversations we've had, here's the information, here's the notes. If we have a subpoena for their notes, I go through their notes, I highlight it, bookmark it for them. And so when they're at a hearing, they just tap it and it goes right to that. So I create like a spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet with the information for them to easily access it. So I cut their personal work time down on how they do that. So thank you all. Loretta.
Thank you, that was awesome.
You're welcome.
Sandra. A couple of things following up on Sandra. She created this job out of nowhere. She thought it up and thought, how can I help? And so want to plug this particular role in states and counties and communities all across the United States because, and I'm just going to go ahead and say she's happy to train other people how to do this job because she thought it up. It's well received by the attorneys and by the clients. And my language is that she basically does in-house file reviews of these cases and then assists. And it's I watch it in action all the time. It's very productive. Yeah.
I just saying, I feel like I just woke up in family law heaven.
Yes.
Hearing that model, because I work in a dystopian place.
Yes, Sandra, do you have the training in a PowerPoint or something, or do we need to reach out to you?
No, you would need to reach out to me because I don't have a training. But maybe that's a thought process for later, but yeah, I don't have a
We can
training.
absolutely, on past intervention, have you on to do that, absolutely.
Right, and it's powerful service. I'm participate in some of the cases, and it's very effective. Sandra and I decided to call this no-win double binds, and her focus was on pre-reunification, while they're still in litigation, and then I am bringing into the conversation no-will double binds therapeutically. And so first I want to talk about no-win double binds are intentionally and purposefully created by the alienating parent, things that cause the targeted parent to feel this is a no-win situation, damned if I do and damned if I don't. And we talked about Dr. Stephen Miller last night, and I want to say this is a personal writing from him that he has given to some of this. This is his brilliant definition, and it so much applies to the work that we do. No-win double binds are crazy-making situations. There's a reason why I bring in Dr. Salvador Minuchin. He also discussed no-win double binds for children. He was the preeminent developer of family therapy, somebody that we model our treatment program after, and he's just the father of family therapy. And so the no-win double binds that we're going to be talking about, Sandra mentioned them, we've heard them here before, that contributed to, they're the crazy-making, I can't parent, I can't not parent, and they're the basis of creating so much of the 4 A's we've talked about. If we're not familiar with the term, the 4 A's, the typical behavioral reactions, emotional reactions of target parents are, they present as angry, anxious, agitated, and afraid, and that's because of this no-win double bind that parents are so trapped in all the time. Conversely, if you know the research, the alienating parent we call the 4 C's, calm, cool, charming, and convincing. So we have the calm, cool, charming, and convincing person presenting in court and to professionals and to the judges. And then we have the alienated parent who's angry, anxious, and afraid and agitated. So that's the no-win double binds. I'm going to be talking about some of how we address that. So one of the things I want to start with is to discuss, we do all of our work on the research and the science that we're talking about here today. On Dr. Miller's work, Dr. Burnett's, we stand and adhere to and just utilize the best practices in the research and the science. So that's what I'm going to be presenting on a little bit with the no-win double binds. Conversely, we sometimes hear lately that we talked about earlier today, it's junk science, and a lot of popular social media sites saying this is junk science, it's been disproven. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's not junk science. It's like that Demos was talking about earlier. We know of over and minimum 1,200 cases in trial and appellate courts that have used this science, that have been qualified under the strictest standards. So we're very science-based. Parenting the child versus the alienated child, the behavior is demonstrably and measurably different between alienated children and abused children. And I don't know if you all are familiar with the research that I'm going to be talking about, Dr. Stephen Miller and Burnett and Baker's research on the difference between alienated children and abused children. But that is such a critical point for us to, when we're doing evaluations and we're doing treatment, for us to be able to make this huge distinction between the two ways the children present. It's very easy to define and to see when you see it. Physically abused children were reported to maintain relationships with abusive caregivers, which presents challenges as well as opportunities for clinicians working with this highly vulnerable population. That's what the summation of this research article is, done by Dr. Stephen Miller, Amy Baker, William Burnett, and published in the Journal of Child and Family Studies, of over 17,000, almost 17,800 children and 300 of their professionals that worked with them. And what they found in this study was that children who were adjudicated, they were in foster care system, who were removed from their families, they generally did not reject their parents. They didn't present as over-empowered. Mostly they were afraid to. They didn't present as over-empowered and or disrespectful. And they didn't present with the known manifestations, Dr. Gardner's 8 manifestations. There's more studying to do with that, on that subject. But it was clear across the board in this research that children present entirely differently. Children who have been alienated are very different kids in the way that they behave. Obviously, if you have alienated children or you work with them, you already know you already know that. Another research study, Dr. Baker and her team reviewed 27 different large studies of children in the foster care system and found out the same results. They did a long and exhaustive study of these studies, found that children who were in the foster care system they missed their parent. And I was a director of foster care agencies in 2 different states for a time. And I can say that our kids wanted the abuse to stop, but they wanted to go home. Every one of them wanted to go home, present very differently from alienated children. They found that children felt afraid of being separated by their parent. Children blame themselves. That is one of the classic signs is abused children, is they make excuses for the abuse. If only I hadn't, talked back, I wouldn't have been hit. They take blame for the parent. And they minimize bad behavior of their parent. And they are doing this because they want to go home. So overlay that and overlap that with the behaviors we know that are from alienated children. I'm trying to speed talk my way through because so we can get all of this information there. So they present very differently. Abused children, very different from alienated children. If you are not familiar with those studies, highly recommend reading them. They're fascinating. Okay, as you know, if you work with them or you have children that are alienated, typical presentation, they're defiant, overempowered, they're running the show. They're disengaged, they're depressed, they're anxious, challenging, provocative, and emotionally and sometimes physically abusive toward their parent. Completely different presentation than children who are alienated, who we just talked about. No in double binds. Target parent fears. So why it's a double bind in this sense is because of the trap parents get into. If I do what I need to do to help my child behave in appropriate ways, socially appropriately ways, and I need to discipline them, I'm going to be accused of abuse. I'm going to face false allegations. If I don't do it, I'm going to be accused. If I do parent this way, I'm going to be accused. There are going to be false allegations if I set limits. And if the behavior deteriorates, if I need to provide punishments, the child's going to go home, go to the other parent, and I'm going to be accused of abuse. I see it all the time in my practice. And then one of the unintended consequence, I guess it's the intended consequence, is the insecurity target parents develop and live with. They begin very quickly to question their own decision making, their own instincts that they had that were working for them just time before this all started. They lose their confidence. We deal with so many target parents who are unable, they're frozen, they're unable to depend on their instincts and their decisions that they used to do. They're so afraid to do something wrong. Disturbing the peace. Other issues that wouldn't make sense to us outside of this, they're accused of buying children's love if they give presents. They're accused of neglect if they don't. Causing harm by enforcing respecting their wishes versus enforcing the schedule and making the transitions happen. Am I going to be the bad guy for enforcing it, or for feeding into the narrative that I'm unfit, loving, and unavailable, unloving and unavailable, because I'm not enforcing those visits? There's a no-win for that parent. What's the solution? Whether you are in an official reunification program in qualified family therapy, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but what is the solution? Continue to change experience to change the relationship. That's a very difficult order for parents to do when you're in the damned if I do and damned if I don't. Must change the experience in order to change the relationship, and when you can't do that, then that's the issue that we see every day in practice. Can parents succeed? Absolutely. So how? So I want to talk just a moment about Dr. Salvador Minuchin. He was a preeminent founder of the family therapy movement way back in the 50s. He is the one, and I'll just tell you real briefly because we probably won't get to the end of the part. Dr. Minuchin was a child psychiatrist. He had worked at and developed various hospitals in the East Coast, and he would get the sickest of the sick children in on their deathbeds, children who were anorexic, that had tried suicide, very sick children. And he would work with them, and sometimes they would be with him for 6 months or a year in the hospital. He would get them stabilized and on their feet and send them home, only for them to return in a very short amount of time. And he began to work with some of the other forerunners of the family therapy movement and workers, Jay Haley and Ackerman and the other people in the fields of bonding and attachment. And together they looked at, why are these children coming back worse off than when we sent them? Why are they coming in the first place? And he began to discover that the missing piece was that the children weren't the problem, the families were the problem. And if you're working to treat just the child, then you're missing the point, and sending that child back into a sick environment is going to send him back here or her back here in worse situation. So over time, Dr. Minuchin developed the beginning of what we now know as family therapy. And the core of his work was that it was the child's personal experience, not insight, that created change for that child. So you change the dynamics in certain specific ways in certain relationships, and that is what changes for that child. Sandra was, if we had more time, was going to tell a story about a recent case where the child got targeted as the problem in the family, and sent a little 9-year-old sent to a psychiatric hospital just a couple days ago because her behavior was erratic. And rather than say, well, what are the parents doing, they just send the child to the hospital. Dr. Minuchin said, that is what is causing the problem. That is where we're mistaken. That is why we don't do individual therapy with children. That is why we need to look at. His other major contribution is the triangulation of children. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Minuchin's work, but way back in the 50s, he wrote extensively about triangulating children, where one parent triangulates that child into an alliance with that parent against the other parent. We know that today as alienation, but way back when, he saw that what these children were suffering from way back when was the triangulation of these cross-general relationships, because the parents' marriage was the thing that was in trouble, and it was reflecting in the child's behavior. So that's Dr. Salvador Minuchin's beginning of his contribution. What behaviors require changing? So one of the components of that is not only what behaviors require changing. When are those just developmentally appropriate behaviors? When children go back to a parent that they maybe haven't seen for some time, a 15-year-old is rebuilding a relationship, usually by court order, with a parent that they may have not seen for 1, 2, 3. I just worked with a family. This 15-year-old hadn't seen dad since he was 9. And they look at, well, my child is now holed up in his bedroom. He is acting, defiant. And so we have to really look at what is just normal developmental behavior. Teenagers withdraw, teenagers are mouthy, teenagers do what teenagers do, and even younger children. So it's be able to discern what is normal developmental behavior from behaviors that are then reflective of, in our case with our families, where patterns are reemerging of the false narratives, patterns are reemerging of the over-empowerment or defiance surfacing again. So those are the things that we're looking at, defining with clinical help what is normal behavior, and then what is a pattern again. And one thing that we know to be true, and from Dr. Minuchin's work and in our work, that parents are the experts on their children, and parents know what is going on in their children. I always tell parents, trust your instincts on this. You be the one to decide if apart from all these no-win double binds, what are your instincts? And sometimes when parents have lost that instinct so much, we really encourage them to get into individual therapy, get into parenting classes, rebuild your confidence, reignite with your own instincts. If you're confused about what is normal developmental behavior and what is a regression, then there's some work that you need to do on this. But it's important to distinguish between what is developmental and what is the reemergent of behavior. Parenting strategies. This is just an approach that comes from Dr. Mnuchin. And the one piece that I wanted to add here is why we do what we do, and we're so aligned with Dr. Mnuchin's work, is Linda Gottlieb, who developed Turning Points for Families program that we work from. She was Dr. Mnuchin's right-hand therapist for decades. She was very closely aligned in the hospitals with him. She is one of the few remaining directly trained therapists by Dr. Mnuchin. So we are very closely aligned with the real true sense of what family therapy is, and the family therapy is the parent is the therapist, the parent is the healer. And so I like to say this is not a literal thing, and Linda, forgive me if you hear this, but I would then consider myself a clinical grandchild of Dr. Mnuchin, because I've spent many years training in the same model with her. And what we look at is the first thing you do is you begin with the Socratic method. And when we're looking at children's behavior, we always tell children what we want to tell them, but we do it in the form of a question. So they'll shut down. They're not going to listen to us. That is one of the ways we help parents out of the no-win double bind, is if I feel like there's behaviors reemerging or there's contact, I don't just come out and blurt it out. I'll begin with a Socratic method of asking a question. You begin in the most general senses, and like it says here, describe behaviors and ask questions. And this would be a common conversation. You're suddenly behaving differently. I'm wondering if you recognize that, what do you think is the cause? And if there's a lack of communication, then we drill down into that and get more confrontational in each stage. So we begin very general and then ask more direct questions. Start out with, I can't, things that we tell a child. And, a lot of times we have to build parents up into having the confidence to do this. But a lot of times, we begin with the parent telling the child, I can't ignore your behavior. It is my job to make sure I parent you. This is not acceptable behavior to talk this way and to treat parents this way. Sometimes the kids that we work with and the families we work with, that is the first time they've heard that message in a very long time. I can think of some children in treatment that have been allowed to not only treat the alienating parent in very very sociopathic ways, just ways that are harmful and hateful without is one of the 8 manifestations, lack of guilt. And so parents have to tell that children there are boundaries that need to happen. You may not have had them in 4 or 5 years, 4 or 5 months, but these boundaries need to happen. And I can't allow you to do that. I'm seeing these behaviors. I'm seeing this happen again in you. I can't do it, and so this is what we need to do. I'm responsible for making you behave appropriately. And I'm putting you on notice that we're going to be setting boundaries. We're going to have consequences. So we always have them include the plan. The plan is this. We are going to, if these behaviors continue, this is basic parent education, but if these behaviors continue, these are the kind of consequences that we are going to be looking at. And again, over and over and over for those who work with families and those who have overempowered children. Parents know their children the best. I've heard Linda Gottlieb say many, many times, the reason why we don't, if we have time, we'll get to this part, but the reason why we do not advocate individual therapy for children, we do not do that, is because back to family therapy, Dr. Mnuchin showed that it is the parent that's the healer. Even the parent that is struggling with parenting skills, struggling with their instincts and their fears, it's the parent that has the keys to that child's heart. Their inner DNA is intertwined. That's the parent that can reach that child much faster, much thoroughly, much more intensively than a therapist. And so that parent is somebody that Dr. Mnuchin relied on, that parent reaching that child's instincts and communicating much, much, much more effectively than parents ever do. And in treatment, in Turning Points and in our aftercare programs, we have the parent, it's traditional family therapy. We have the parent as the main therapist in the room, and we back them up and we lead them and we guide them. But we re-empower the parent as the authority in the room, and then walk them through and assist at times when we need to the intervention. But we rely on that parent's relationship. The parents know what that child needs to have corrected and know what that child needs. So we work collaboratively with parents to support that. Never do we put the attention on the therapist as the almighty, brilliantly trained, licensed person that's going to help your child. It's the parent that helps. Yes?
Yes, I see this, the same you explain. I see this, I come from the Netherlands, I see that at home as well. The thing is that when a child is alienated and the alienated parent tries to put boundaries on behavior, the child will easily say, if you do that, I go back to mom or dad. How do you deal with that?
Well, we deal with that in family therapy first and foremost. So I'm talking about parenting strategies in the moment, setting boundaries, letting them know. We must deal with that, and as a slide, it's a good question coming up a time or two. Family therapy is where we deal with the tough stuff. And family therapy is we don't deal with for example, challenging the child's false narrative and false beliefs individually. That is something done only in family therapy courts. But in our situation and the families that we work with, some children do want to go back. We generally work with court orders that define the child's relationship and parenting time with that parent, and work collaboratively with that child, with that parent and child. That child moves forward through reunifying with their other parent, their alienating parent, as they get more cooperative with our parent. So you have a court order, you're not going back, and that's going to be enforced. And that is something that is now, we're all following the rules, and that's going to happen.
Are the court orders reinforced? Because we have court orders as well. Child walks away, runs back to the other parent, and
Well, and I see an attorney in the room smiling. And the answer is some parents end up in jail time if they keep interfering with their court orders. That is not necessarily the main answer, is that therapeutically, we let that child know that we want you to get back to a full parenting plan with both parents. We want to help you do that. If you're not cooperating with us, we are going to be able to report back to the court as long as we need to that you are not complying with what you need to do.
the court will stay strict here in the U.S.
Generally,
At home, they say, okay, well, we've tried everything, let it be.
you want to answer that?
Well, I had a question, but I'd be happy to answer your question. Texas courts have the authority to enforce their orders under various theories. One is criminal contempt. I told you, mom or dad, to do this or not. You didn't do it. You get up to 6 months in jail. Or civil contempt. I told you to go do this. Until you do this, you're in jail. Let me know when you're ready to get
We
out.
have all those rulings, but the courts don't use them.
I'm in Central Texas, so there's both spectrums of the political, American political gambit are there, left and right. And both, well, I was going to say in the most left of center, I've had them jail. In the most right of center, I've had them jail. And so I don't think it's necessarily politics. It's more about having experts such as Ms. Maase in the jurisdiction, who's trained up the judges enough to see that that contempt tool will affect an outcome. It's not theoretical. They've seen it happen, and the judges then talk to other judges, and it starts to proliferate.
And that goes back to that goes back to where we started is the training and the understanding and using the research to reach to the judges and say, this is child abuse. This is a form of psychological maltreatment. If you're not enforcing the court orders, the child is allowed to be continued to be put in the middle in this way. We're perpetuating child abuse. And just real briefly, getting back into the science, and I can give you this later if anybody's interested. What we know is that the science shows us that this form of psychological maltreatment, letting them be in the middle, letting them feel the guilt, children feel guilt deep down when they are put in the middle between these parents, is that psychological maltreatment has the same outcomes for children as if they're being physically molested or physically abused. And we educate the courts that you are allowing this abuse to happen, and this is going to have a lifelong consequence for the families.
So I was going to ask about on the individual therapy side of that issue for children. If individual therapy is what happens, does it make a difference? And I don't know, like, whatever the therapist's responsibilities to the child are, but if the therapist understands parental alienation, understands that it exists and the degree to which it exists, and won't, and I don't know if they can do that, like, I'm not validating that these false things happened, is that possible? Are therapists able to shift to say, well, that's not my understanding, and, kind of shift and redirect? And if so, does it make a difference in where there is individual therapy happening, whether the therapist is well-trained in parental alienation?
So that is a great question. Thank you. We live with that model all the time because we're still on many jurisdictions still on that form where everybody gets a therapist, including the child. So we live with that all the time. A couple of things is that the other research and Dr. Miller's great work, he taught clinical reasoning at Harvard Medical School for 4 decades, and so we bring in all of that piece. And the clinical reasoning is that these are very counterintuitive issues, that what you think is happening in a situation, the opposite is probably happening. So you've got to learn about the counterintuitive issues if you're really going to do this work. And therapists who are trained in the counterintuitive issues, can it be productive if they truly are trained and be a part of the team? They still don't have, in the moment, validation of what that particular child experienced at that particular time with that family and call out the false narrative. They still don't have that history. So when we get this model in, and we do have trained therapists, there's still a deficit because they're not able to really reach that child on a real memory. So what happens with these cases is then some of the cracks in the foundation begin to surface, and the therapists will throw up their hands and say, we're not making progress, or we see a reemergence of the false narratives come back, or we see some problems as a result, and we'll suggest, why don't we just cool the individual for a while and we'll up the family therapy piece and work from a systems perspective again, because it is not the child with the issue, it's the family dynamic is the issue. And we make that case loud and clear. It is not, children they're not born, for the most part, they're not born with psychopathologies. They're born as the result of the family dynamic. So let's look at the family dynamic again and see what we're missing, and then bring that parent in as the healer. So we have to work alongside those systems, and I can't tell you how many times we wish that we did have a trained therapist who's trained in parental alienation, because then when we get one who's not, and they start, the reason why we say no therapy, the second piece of that individual, is because then they'll start empathizing with and validating the child's false narrative, and that will start re-empowering them. And much longer discussion here, but the discussion is, empowering them in a delusional narrative back into something that didn't exist. It's inconsistent with their real history. Then you've got an just unaware therapist that's perpetuating that again, which puts us back into ground zero, and we have to start all over again in family therapy. So we really strongly caution against this. You had a question?
I did. In Colorado, I have quite a few clients who are in this challenge of the police don't do anything to enforce the civil, you've got to go to court. But it takes them up to a year to get to court, and that entire time the kid's still with the alienated parent. Is there any way to like expedite some kind of emergency or something to expedite that hearing?
So something I learned this week, I went down to the Capitol with somebody from brilliant group, the National Parents Organization, and I learned from them, from one person I went with, that she has created a website that has every state's laws about mandatory custody and what police can and can't do. It is, according to them, I haven't seen the website, but according to them, it is not accurate that police can't enforce it. And so I will, if anybody's interested, you can contact me about that website. I'll get that from her, because that is a deficit in what we believe, that they can't enforce it. They can, and then they have procedures when police don't. So I will get you that information. So that is not a suitable answer in terms of how you expedite that, except for just in that one instance that there is state law that police are already laws on the books that they can and should assist and mandate those transitions in the custody. In Texas, they were just very effective in getting a law now that is against the law to actually interfere with any kind of custody, the parents' other time. They're really ahead of the game in Texas, and so you contact me, because one more thing that we talked about today is in the National Parents Organization and in the work that we're doing, there's a National Parents Organization in all the states, but they're not run by organized team, that follow the model that Texas uses. And so they're requesting that we get more parent volunteers to get more involved, and we can give you more information that actually go to, and we have a step-by-step system that actually go to the legislators. This is just an aside, that actually go to the legislators and are very effective in fighting back on Caden's law. And I can give you a lot more information on that, and they've asked me to make sure that everybody knows that there is a system in place. It's not very well known, and we want to make sure that you guys take it back to your states. So if you contact me, I'll get you more information on that. In terms of expediting it, I think we need to wrap up, and Sandra would be a good person to talk about what they do when they're expediting, I've been on many cases, and those cases always come down to, are you having an expert testify about the damage when this is happening, and training the judges. I want to get to one last piece here. Of course, if children disclose legitimate issues, that's a deal breaker. We're always on, we don't want to just assume and with confirmatory bias not recognize when there's abuse happening, but we're talking about children who are presenting and there's no abuse found, so obviously alienated children. I'm just going to have to move on to one thing, because I'm responding to, don't try to get the child to relinquish a narrative on your own. That is something that's done in family therapy. Talking about I statements, I'm seeing this, but I'm trying to get to a piece here because we need to wrap it up. One great thing that I've taught parents for very, very long time is actually Dr. Warshak, but even before then, Dr. Gardner. One way we correct narratives without bad-mouthing the other parent, which is a huge no-no, is we say one simple line to them. And when you're hearing a false narrative and you're told you're abused, is mommy or daddy's mistaken. We normalize, everybody makes mistakes. We're not bad-mouthing. Everybody is guilty of that. Mommy's mistaken. I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And it's a way of correcting the narrative in a general sense without giving adult-related issues to a child. But that one statement, parents have come back over and over and over again, said that changed my life. Because when I hear those false accusations, we don't deal with them in except for in therapy, but in the moment when you're driving around, somebody says you did this, well, mom's mistaken or dad's mistaken, this is what happened instead. But there is, you never badmouth to the other parent. What I want to get to is we have parent groups, and one of the most common issues that we have from our parent groups when there is a no contact order or a minimal contact order is, how do I be the bad guy and enforce the order and still develop my relationship with my child? And it almost always comes down to, how do my child's contacting them on their phone. If I take the phone away and I take their computers away, then I'm the bad guy, and it is a war with teenagers to take away their communication. And so how do you manage it? First, recognize there are more ways to access communication than we'll ever know. I had a parent who was using her son's email system at school to communicate and send emails back and forth between parent and child. They just looked like he was emailing himself, so nobody caught it for a couple of months, but we saw a change in his behavior. So you can break into their school systems, on online gaming systems. Another creative thing we've seen is they will arrange with the child before they go to treatment, secret hiding places, secret places where they'll go and they'll take and leave messages, and they'll do that back and forth. There is infinite amount of ways that these parents push for illicit contact. So what do? Through gaming systems. And so what first of all is the recourse legally. They explore through their attorneys, and what we've had to do is saying we're seeing a change in behavior, so we're asking for more discovery from the parent, from the attorneys. When parents have legitimate concerns about the electronic contact, again, you go into family therapy and use the Socratic method. I see these changes happening. I know something's going on. And there are so many techniques that parents use about how to monitor their phones, and that's not for me to tell a parent how to do that, but, they have curfew on phones, curfew on communications. They have the right to look through their communications. They have a right to monitor that. But we really strongly suggest, yes, you are going to be the bad guy if you just take your phone away from your teen. That's just going to really create a whole new war. So you use the Socratic method we talked about before in therapy, and let it be known we are watching, and something's different, let's talk about it, and you process it in family therapy over and over again until you get down to the bottom, saying, if I continue to see these behaviors, you give me no choice but to take it to the next level of intervention. Well, I will have to do it. So help me avoid doing that. Let's talk about it, and really addressing it in family therapy and letting them know there's going to be a significant consequence coming. You have the right and the option to have that avoided right now, but it's coming. And so how are we going to do that and work on that together? That's just a constant question that comes up in our parenting groups. What are some of the consequences? What worked for you in the past as a parent? What did you do before? Of course, children were younger back then, so begin with the least intrusive, what we just talked about. And want to talk about, for parents who have children who've been over-empowered, really strongly just reinforce your parenting skills. Working, if you're not familiar with the 1, 2, 3 Magic parenting program, that's a good one to learn. Parenting with Love and Logic, I wrote my master's on it about 30 years ago. That's an excellent parenting book. There's a lot of classes to take. Strengthen your skills as a parent, and collaborate with your family therapist. And that's how we're effective in working through the no-win double binds with families. It's all about changing behavior, again, focusing not on changing insight. Doesn't help children. You can have all the insight in the world, and you're still going to have the behavior. It's changing the behavior, changing the dynamic. That's why it doesn't happen in individual therapy. It happens in the dynamic with the parent. And then we don't have time, but Dr. Stephen Miller wrote extensively about traditional therapies are worse than worthless, if you're not familiar with that. I'm happy to talk with you about it, or you can look up his work. We're done. We're late here today. So there's just a whole other conversation about, and the research-based, why family therapy, why individual therapy doesn't work. But anyway, thank you for bearing with me. I think we've gone a little long, and thank you.